By all accounts, Uday Hussein was an evil man whose lifestyle was funded through illegal means. He was a man who was involved in the mass murder, assault and torture of many different people. He was also the eldest son of Saddam Hussein, and he was a central part of Saddam's government. He was also the heir apparent to his riches and position inside of Iraq, but his brutality would at some point even alienate his father, to the point where there were talks about Saddam being succeeded by his second son, Qasem. But Uday would become the second most wanted person of Saddam's regime following the invasion of Iraq, but the American troops would catch up with him. Join us today as we look at the execution of Uday Hussein, the son of Saddam, and to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. By the standards of Saddam Hussein's Iraqi regime, Uday was a monster and a sadist. He was a brutal man, and he had a significant amount of privilege as the son of the dictator. But Uday was not accepted by the powers of the military and security services, who favoured his other brother. But Uday had a role in politics. He was elected to the parliament with 99% of the vote, but he would become the most hated man in Iraq. He was a flamboyant man, but also was very tall, standing well over 6 foot, and he enjoyed the playboy lifestyle, having lavish and loud parties, and he also loved fast cars. But he was also the chair of the Iraqi Olympic Committee and the national football team, and he had a diverse role in the government. However, during one football match, he was so desperate for a win that he rang up the dressing room at half-time and threatened to cut off the players' legs and throw them to ravenous dogs. He also ordered players to be beaten on their soles of their feet after a bad game. One footballer was refusing to join a new club, and because of this he was kidnapped by Uday's men and was beaten and accused of harassment, but the following day he then accepted the offer when he was threatened with death. It was believed that the punishments inflicted by him were so severe that they even ended the careers and significantly destroyed the abilities of the players, to the point where half the Iraqi athletes had left the country, and many faked illnesses before playing against strong competitors so they would not lose and be tortured or beaten. But he was a man who abused women en masse, and women who caught his eye would be taken to his palace, which would be filled with drugs. It's believed Uday Hussein also had a private torture chamber on the banks of the Tigris, but in 1988 he would attack his father's bodyguard and bludgeon him to death in front of many at a party. He also shot one of his uncles in his leg, and the crazy behaviour of Uday dissuaded his father in making him the heir. He also had a number of failed marriages, and he would treat these wives awfully. He was in 1996 attacked when gunmen opened fire on his red Porsche in the middle of Baghdad, and this left Uday permanently struggling with his mobility. But he was a man who murdered many more, and it's believed he even used an Iron Maiden torture device on people. Many would allege that Saddam was even more humane than Uday was. He stole over 1,000 luxury cars. If army officers did not salute him, then he would execute and murder them instantly. But at parties he was known for firing his AK-47 indiscriminately when he felt like it. Uday would also get a body double, as these men were known as bullet catchers, and his number 2 would be a man in his former class who was serving in the army. This man had no wish to be a body double for one of the most hated men in Iraq, but he had no choice in the matter at all. But after declining, he was then thrown into a tiny cell, which had been painted red, and it was impossible for him to sleep. He was also kept awake by the torture of other inmates, but then he accepted the offer after his ordeal. But following the American invasion of Iraq, Uday Hussein was the second most wanted person behind his father, and the Americans would eventually catch up with him. Saddam's closest aide and secretary had been captured, and he told American authorities that Saddam's sons had tried to go to Syria, but they were then turned back. They tried again to consider leaving Iraq, and at this time it was not possible. But they then stayed in their villa and palace, but on the 21st of July 2003, a man who had been sheltering Uday and Qasem left the villa after tipping off the brothers, and he then went to the base of the 101st Airborne to turn over the 2 sons and claim a $30 million reward. It was said, "This man was nervous. I could tell more nervous than anyone else I'd been dealing with. Yet he had the confidence in what he said, more than most people." This man gave the exact locations and also described their daily habits and routines. On the morning of the 22nd of July 2003, Task Force 20, along with soldiers of the US 101st Airborne Division, surrounded Uday and Qasem's home in the city of Mosul. Uday was the ace of hearts on the most wanted playing cards, and the soldiers then tried to capture the inhabitants of the house. Around 200 American soldiers surrounded and fired upon the settlement. In the firefight, Uday was killed. It took 4 hours for the US soldiers to enter the house, and they then inside found 4 bodies. The soldiers had tried to enter the house 3 times, but the brothers were firing from a bathroom in the front of the building. They even threw grenades at the advancing Americans too. They then bombed the house and fired a number of missiles. It's believed that Uday was killed in the missile strike on the house, with much of the safe house being reduced to rubble. An announcement had been made for the men to come out peacefully, but then Uday fired at the Americans and the special forces did try to attack, but came under heavy fire. But it was the missiles that did the job, and later Americans confirmed through dental records that Uday Hussein was dead inside the safe house, and the informant was given $30 million for his information. Saddam, following their death, would make a statement saying, "Beloved Iraqis, your brothers Uday Quasi and Mustafa, the son of Quasi, took a stand of faith, which pleases God, makes a friend happy, and makes an enemy angry. They stood in the arena of jihad in Mosul after a violent battle with the enemy that lasted 6 hours. The armies of aggression mobilised all types of weapons of the ground forces against them, and succeeded to harm them only when they used planes against the house which they were in. Thus they adopted a stand with which God has honoured this Hussein family, so that the present would be a continuation of the brilliant, genuine, faithful and honourable past. We thank God for what he has ordained for us, when he honoured us with their martyrdom for his sake. We ask Almighty God to satisfy them and all the righteous martyrs after they satisfied him with their faithful jihadist stand. Had Saddam Hussein had 100 children, other than Uday and Quasi, Saddam Hussein would have sacrificed them on the same path God honoured us by their martyrdom. If you had killed Uday, Quasi, Mustafa and another Mujahideen man with them, all the youths of our nation and the youths of Iraq are Uday, Quasi and Mustafa in the fields of jihad. Uday Hussein was a brutal and barbaric politician, a member of government, who was also the oldest son of the Iraqi dictator, who would be brought into the execution chamber himself following his capture. He was a man who was ruthless and very intimidating, and even his close friends would fear him greatly. Uday was a man who was guilty of huge scores of crimes, but in a firefight he would be killed at the hands of the American forces. Shockingly, when the Americans entered the villa, they found around $100 million worth of Iraqi currency in US dollars. After his death, he was buried in a cemetery near to his hometown alongside his brother, but he was a man who was completely brutal and barbaric, and was the most hated man in the whole of Iraq. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.